There are two things that I know to be true from my personal experience about the Mideastern culture. The people are the most hospitable people you will ever meet, and they love to strike a good bargain. In many of the Palestinian shops that I've been to, shopkeepers have greeted me at the door with some sort of treat, perhaps a little bite of baklava or a cup of Turkish coffee. They are warm and welcoming, offering treats not so that you'll buy something, but because it's just who they are. However, when it does come to getting you to buy something, that's a whole different matter. They are master negotiators. The listed price is always just a suggestion, a starting point for whatever the price is that you'll eventually pay. We found this to be true in Turkey as well. You can just ask Roy about the deal he got on a rug that he and Julie bought in Kudasi. It was quite a deal that was struck. Now, both of these traits can be seen in our gospel lesson for this morning from Genesis, a continuation from last week's focus on extravagant hospitality. But in case you missed it, let me fill you in from last week. Last Sunday, we found Abraham reclining beneath the terebinths of Mamre when he was approached by three divine strangers. Abraham immediately jumped up and sprung into action, having Sarah and the servant prepare a feast for their guests so lavish that he may have gone a little overboard. If you remember, we talked about hospitality being a matter of life and death in ancient times. Providing travelers with food and water and safety was essential to their survival in the desert wilderness. Back then, hospitality was a sacred code of conduct, and Abraham and Sarah showed us how to do it best. We also saw that blessing also comes from such hospitality. So we left off with the three visitors departing for Sodom. And here's where we pick up the story again today. Now, as Abraham sees his guests off, we as the reader quickly become privy to an internal dialogue between the divine about whether or not they should tell Abraham about what is about to happen to Sodom and Gomorrah. And because of God's covenant with Abraham, God decides to go ahead and let him in on what's going on. The Holy tells Abraham that there is a great outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah. How very grave is their sin, God says. And so God has decided to go down and check it out. So as two of the divine messengers walk away, headed to Sodom, the text says that the Holy stays behind and enters into what can only be seen as a heated debate with Abraham regarding the fate of Sodom. Abraham says, "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not forgive it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?" The master negotiations begin. Abraham boldly asks for mercy for the city of Sodom for the sake of a righteous few. Now, as we will soon learn, Abraham has a personal stake in this ask. He's not merely asking for mercy for a city of strangers, but for his nephew Lot, who lives there. Surely Lot will be found righteous. And so the bargaining continues. First with the city being saved if 50 righteous people are found, and then 45, and then 40, and then 30, and then 20, and finally all the way down to 10. God finally relents, saying, "For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it." Now, just this part of the story alone leaves us with many questions. Questions about what to do with the problem of evil in our world and what role justice and mercy plays in its presence. But before we dig into those questions, let's look a little more closely at what's happening in Sodom. What was so terrible that God would want to destroy the whole entire city? What sins were so very grave that not even 10 righteous people might not be found there? For the answer to that question, we have to jump ahead to Genesis 19. We also find additional information that will help us in Jewish legend and prophetic words and even the words of Jesus himself. But first, let's look at chapter 19. When the two angels come to Sodom later that evening, they find Abraham's nephew Lot sitting at the city gate. Lot invites them into his home to spend the night, offering them food and water and safety, which is required of the customary hospitality of the time. Verses 4 and 5 read, "But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surround the house, and they call to Lot, 'Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so we may know them.'" Now there's a lot going on here, and much to-do has been made over these few verses, even still today. This story is known as one of the Bible's clobber passages, often used against the LGBTQ community as an example of God's condemnation. So let's look at it a little bit closer. Here we have a whole crowd of people coming to Lot's door saying, "Bring them out so we may know them." Now, in biblical times, to know is just a softer way of saying to have sex with someone. Who are these people who want to know the strangers? The text reads, Kol ha'am mikatseh, which literally translates, all the people from every quarter. All the people, from young to old, from man to woman, all of the people of Sodom surrounded Lot's house to enact sexual violence against the visitors. This doesn't seem like a very hospitable way to welcome guests. Yet what amounted to gang rape was very common in ancient times. It was a way of showing dominance, especially when one group of people were to conquer another group of people. This kind of sex was all about power and control, never about love. Grave was their sin indeed. There's also a Jewish legend about a girl who lived in Sodom, as told in Volume 1 of Legends of the Jews. After describing what had happened at Lot's house that night, the text says, "The cruelty of the Sodomites went still further. Lot had a daughter, Paltit, so named because she had been born to him shortly after he escaped captivity with the help of Abraham. Paltit lived in Sodom, where she had married. Once a beggar came to town, and the court issued a proclamation that none of them should give the man anything to eat, in order that he might die of starvation. But Paltit had pity upon the unfortunate man, and every day when she went to the well to draw water, she supplied him with a piece of bread which she hid in her water pitcher. The inhabitants of the two sinful cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, could not understand why the beggar did not perish, and they suspected that someone was giving him food in secret. So 3 men concealed themselves near the beggar and caught Paltit in the act of giving him something to eat. She had to pay for her humanity with death. She was burned upon a pyre. Then we have the prophet of Ezekiel, who says on behalf of God, "This was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. They were haughty and did abominable things before me. Therefore I removed them when I saw it." And in the Gospel according to Matthew, when Jesus tells his disciples about shaking off the dust when they are not shown welcome or hospitality in certain towns, he says, "Truly I tell you, It will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town. So what were the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah? Inhospitality, pride, greed, deception, disregard for the poor and the stranger, inhumanity, and mercilessness. Sodom and Gomorrah became an object lesson on the don'ts of hospitality. Sodom shows no mercy for those in need, and yet even in our text today, Abraham begs for mercy for even them. Abraham bargains with God for the good of others, challenging God to do justice, which is the very thing that God has asked of Abraham in their covenant, to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring about for Abraham what he had promised. Abraham is concerned with the righteous view of Sodom. He's afraid that they will be collateral damage in the destruction of the wicked. So he challenges God to rethink God's decision for the sake of justice. And God does. And so now we're left with the question, is it just for the innocent to suffer for the sin of others? And who are the innocent ones who suffer under the sins of the powerful in our time today? And what are we called to do in the face of such injustice? Sodom failed to see the humanity of others, especially those in need, and there are plenty of examples of the humanity of others being overlooked in our own world today. Sometimes we think we have no right to challenge God, but here we find Abraham doing just that. Abraham boldly speaks up, speaking on behalf of others in all humility, but asking for mercy. Sometimes we think there's nothing that we can do to right the wrongs of the evil in our world. But here we learn that sometimes we have to be willing to take risks, to be bold, to ensure justice for others. Sometimes we ourselves are consumed with our own judgment against others. But this story reminds us of the words of James, which says, "Mercy triumphs over judgment." In her blog post this week, Pastor Nadia Boltz-Weber tells the story of a minister who once accompanied a man named Corey, who was convicted of several murders through the last 2 weeks of his life before he was executed. When the minister was asked why he was willing to see the humanity in someone even like Corey, he responded, "Because if God is love, then God is in the love between us. And if there is not room in the heart of God for Corey, then there is not room in the heart of God for me." God is in the love between us. So as for the do's and don'ts of hospitality, let's recap. Do set aside your own comfort and go above and beyond what is expected in extending extravagant hospitality to others. And do remember to give thanks for those who extend that hospitality to you, especially when they're on the margins or behind the scenes. Don't disregard the humanity of others in your midst. Be brave in using your voice, boldly, but with all humility, to challenge the injustices of our world. Don't give up. The Lord is near. The Lord is offering you lavish hospitality at Christ's table of grace and extending upon you mercy upon mercy upon mercy each and every day. May you find this to be true, today and always. Amen.